Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my May wrap-up. Alright guys, so May was somehow simultaneously both one of the worst reading months I've ever had, but also one of the best, just because I found possibly my favorite fantasy romance book of the year, definitely my favorite as of now, but also I read so many like 2.5, 2-star books that just did not work for me. So I feel like, first off, I didn't read very many books overall. I have been so slumpy in 2024. I'm really hoping the summer is gonna like jumpstart me back into reading. But also, I didn't read as many fantasy romance books, and I feel like that typically ends up, when I have like a lower reading month where my average like star is pretty low, it's typically when I'm not reading a lot of fantasy romance. I just have to accept fantasy romance is like one of my favorite genres, and I need to stick towards that genre. But anyway, there are not a lot of books to talk about, but there's a decent amount. So let's get into it. If you are unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the books I read in May. So starting off with books I read for the Mafia Romance Readathon. So the Mafia Romance Readathon is a readathon that is put together by Jen from the Book Refuge every year, and she was so sweet and asked me to co-host this time around, and I'm so thankful she asked me to co-host because I had such a wonderful time. We had multiple live shows, and I actually read a few of my 4- and 5-star reads during that readathon. So thank you so much, Jen. So starting off, we have When She Unravels. Now, this is the first book in a series. I actually forget the name of the overall series, but this first book is following this girl who ends up, she lives, her family's all in the mafia, so she's very used to like mafia culture, and her father ends up having her marry someone else who's in the mafia who's their enforcer. So it's this guy that really gets off on torture. So he essentially ends up making our main character torture people in front of him for pleasure, and our main character is not about this. So she takes the opportunity to escape, and she flees to Ibiza, where she ends up in the arms of someone else who's high up in the mafia, but this guy is super sweet and really just wants to protect her, and it's their romance. Now, I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. My only issue with this is our main character just refuses to tell the guy that she has ended up fleeing to her history, and there were times where I'm like, why aren't you just telling him? Like, obviously, he's part of the mafia. He's gonna get it, but she just really was reluctant to do so. So that was driving me a little bit crazy, but overall, I did really enjoy this book enough that I picked up the next book in the series. Now, if you can tell, I don't own a physical copy of the next book in the series, and that is because I was not a huge fan of the next book. So on paper, this second book seems like everything I love. It is age gap. It is Virgin Hero. We're following this girl. It's actually the sister of the love interest from book 1, and she ends up being given to another person in the mafia, essentially to keep her safe. So there are a bunch of enemies that are trying to capture this girl. So the main guy from book 1 says, hey, can you watch my little sister and just protect her? So in doing so, there ends up being a romance between the person that's supposed to protect the sister and the sister, and it kind of goes from there. For some reason, I just could not get invested in this romance. I don't know why. I liked the main character enough. I just didn't love the romance in book 2. So book 2, I think I ended up rating 3 stars. Like I said, enjoyable read. It's just not super standout. Like, I can't remember any of their names. But overall, I did enjoy it. And that Mafia series is the only one I've ever read that was set in Ibiza, which I thought was a really cool twist. So if you're a fan of Mafia romance, I would definitely give that series a shot. And this next book, unfortunately, I was not a huge fan of. It is Chained Hands by T.L. Smith. And the only reason I picked this up is because 1, it is Mafia, and it was during the Mafia Romance Readathon, and 2, I'm pretty sure this is going to be one of the Mystic Box special edition book boxes. They're pretty behind on books right now, or their boxes. However, I thought I saw this name. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure this is one of the upcoming boxes that we're going to receive. So anyway, I picked up this book. I will say, first off, there is a trigger that I did not see anywhere on any of the synopses, I don't know, that I read, And I don't have very many triggers, but this is like a major one. And it happened within like the first few chapters. And I was like, oh, why? I would not have picked this up if I knew this was going to be discussed. So that I was kind of annoyed about. And just for an overall idea of what the plot is about, we're following this girl that ends up marrying this guy who treats her appallingly. But because he has pretty much secluded her and she doesn't have any friends or family, her life is really this guy. She is dependent upon him. And he ends up selling her to this Russian mobster, I'm pretty sure, from what I remember. I'm just not sure if it's Russian or another country. I'm pretty sure, though. Anyway, sells her to him to pay off some of his debts, and it's their romance. So first off, like I said, that trigger, I just really didn't enjoy. Second, I think it's because I had just read Unravel Me, and the other book, this book in comparison, the audiobook narrators, I wasn't a huge fan of, and just the overall story, I just did not enjoy. So it is the first book in a duet. I will not be picking up that second book. I probably will either skip the Mystic Box, or if I've already paid for it, I'll probably end up selling it. But overall, this didn't work for me, but if that plot synopsis sounds good to you, then definitely pick it up. And the last book I read during the Mafia Romance Readathon was Fear Me, Love Me by Lilith Vincent. This was by far my favorite book that I have read. However, this book will not be for everybody. This book is unhinged in the best possible way. It is also unbelievably dark, so check all of the trigger warnings. I felt uncomfortable during some parts, but overall, I loved this book. So this is a Labyrinth reimagining, and Labyrinth is one of my absolute favorite movies. And let's be honest, all of us, when we watched that movie, we probably had a little bit of a crush on David Bowie. So having that character as the love interest is something that I did not know I wanted until I was reading it, and I was like, oh yes, this is perfection. So to give you an idea of what this book is about, which is very difficult to do, we are following Vivian, and at the start of this, we know that Vivian has saved her baby brother Barlow from Tyrant Mercer, who is this evil guy who has a hedge maze in his backyard that essentially rules this town, and like everyone listens to him. Anyway, because of some debts that our main character's father owed Tyrant, he ended up stealing Barlow, and then Vivian, our main character, saves him, and then Tyrant becomes obsessed with Vivian, and it is their romance, and it is super spicy, and like I said, it's not going to be for everybody, but overall, I loved this book so much. So highly recommend. Just know what you're getting going into it. But overall, please, if you pick this book up, let me know what you think in the comments, because I need to know what you guys think about this book. And next up is a sports romance, which is a genre I don't typically gravitate towards. However, it is Learn Your Lesson by Kandi Steiner. And I had been seeing this book all over Bookstagram, so I really want to give it a try. I actually think I posted a poll on Instagram asking like which book I should read, Learn Your Lesson or Burnout. And this won by like the smallest margin. So on paper, this seems like a book I would love. It is single dad nanny romance. And unfortunately, it didn't really work for me. It was around a 3-star, and that was kind of being generous. But honestly, there was no issues with this book. I just could not connect with this romance and these characters, which is really funny because the main character is actually a kindergarten teacher. So our main character is a kindergarten teacher that her mother and her grandmother have really instilled in her that she doesn't need a man in her life. So she is super independent. She stays at home with her cats and really doesn't have much of a social life. And then she ends up having this girl in her class who is kind of grumpy. I don't want to say grumpy. She just doesn't really show emotion. And then she meets the girl's father and very quickly kind of understands where her student is getting this from. So she ends up becoming a nanny for the father. He ends up being an NHL player. I forget his name in the book. But she ends up moving in to the guest house, and she ends up being a nanny for the daughter. So they have a little bit of a connection while slowly kind of having a crush on the dad. And then there ends up being like a friends with benefits type situation that obviously grows into more. But like I said, I didn't really care about the romance. And every time I picked the book up, I had no interest, or I put the book down, I had no interest in picking it back up. So I feel like maybe hockey romances, besides like one I've read, just don't really work for me. But overall, I think if you like Single Dad Nanny and you're a fan of sports romances, definitely pick this up. I am in the minority. Most people really enjoy this book. Unfortunately, I didn't love it. And the last book before I jump into fantasy romance is Caution to the Wind by Giana Darling. So I believe this is book 7 in the Fallen MC series by Giana Darling. Now, if you are unfamiliar with that series, it is absolutely phenomenal. It is the series that got me into essentially dark romance and contemporary romance. Prior to reading the series, I only read fantasy romance, and it opened up my eyes. But I love this series so much. I have a full spoiler-free series review that I'll leave in the cards and in the description. Now, I will say that video was filmed when I first binged this series, so it's pretty old and it's a little cringy, so I apologize for that, but it will give you a good idea about what each book is about without any spoilers. But anyway, this book was so worth the wait. In full transparency, I have 4 chapters left that I will be reading as soon as I am done editing this video, because this might be a new favorite in the Fallen MC series. So this is following Axeman, real name being Henning, and May. So it is a best friend's dad romance. However, May's best friend, it's a stepdad romance. So there's only around 15 or 16 years between May and Henning. And at the start of our story, I believe May is like 10-ish, and there's a tragedy that takes place that really pushes May more into the family fold of Axeman and his daughter, or his stepdaughter. So the 3 of them are just really, really tight-knit. And then something ends up happening that causes Axeman to go to prison. And when he gets out of prison, he despises May. And the story really goes from there. But honestly, just when any character popped up from the other books, I was so excited. I was giggling. It just felt so good to be back in the Fallen MC world. And like I said, this book was totally worth the wait. So highly recommend if you have not picked up this series. I really want to go back and just reread this series. This book was most reminiscent of Welcome to the Dark Side, or at least for me, there were parts of this, especially in the beginning, that just gave me Zeus Garrow vibes, and I love Zeus so much. So overall, this was one of my favorite reads of the month, and I highly recommend. I forgot, there is one other book I read in May, and we are going to touch on it so unbelievably briefly. So my friend April from Happily Ever April, she ended up being part of a collab that I was also involved in, where we talked about our favorite beach reads. And one of the books that she was talking about was called SPF Me, and it is a sentient sunscreen romance. I read it, I laughed hysterically. I don't think I recommend. I'm not even going to give it a star rating. It was a time, and just know it's sentient sunscreens, plural. So there's more than one. I laughed. It was something. It was unlike anything else I read. And if you want to check it out, you can do that. Put it on your Kindle. It was a time. All right, so moving into fantasy romance. First up was actually a reread, and it is The Never King by Nikki St. Crowe. So I ended up having a spontaneous day off work. I was kind of sick with stomach flu, so I just binged this book. And honestly, I think I enjoyed it more my second time around. The first time I read this physically, the second time I listened to the audiobook, and it was really good. So I'm excited to continue with the audio for this series. But if you're unfamiliar with The Never King, we are following the descendants of Wendy Darling. And all of the descendants of Wendy Darling have slowly gone mad, and they are terrified that their daughter will be taken by Peter Pan, which does always end up happening. So our main character in this is very annoyed that her mother is constantly telling her that on her 18th birthday, Peter Pan is going to kidnap her. Well, her 18th birthday arrives, and it turns out her mother is not insane, and Peter Pan shows up and ends up taking Wendy to Neverland, where she meets the Lost Boys, and it has a spicy moment between some of them. And these books are very, very short, so not very much happens. This is very much like the setup book, although there is definitely some spicy time. But like I said, I'm very excited to continue with this series. So if you're looking for a dark fantasy romance that's a very easy read, I highly recommend The Never King. And last up is my Patreon book club pick for May, as well as my top fantasy romance read of the year, and by far my favorite read this month. It is When the Moon Hatched. Thank you so much, everyone who said I needed to pick this book up. I did end up waiting for the audiobook to release. I'm very happy I did that because I don't think I could have gotten through this book physically. The writing, thank you to the subscriber that gave me the right word, is very verbose. However, it just crafts such a beautiful world. Like, I don't know how you'd be able to do this book without this type of writing. It's so unbelievably good. And this book doesn't rely on the typical romantasy tropes. It is so unique and just well thought out, and I loved this book. So if you're unfamiliar with When the Moon Hatched, it's going to be very difficult for me to summarize this book. So I'm just going to give you my overall kind of gist. It is set in a world where there used to be these creators, and these creators all had different songs. So think of like the elemental signs. So earth, fire, air, stuff like that. There was a creator that, I'm not even going to get into that actually. So anyway, fast forward, we are following our main character. And she is one of the people that are known as null, where she isn't able to sing the songs from these creators to create certain magic. So if you are a null, they end up like clipping your ear and you're kind of seen as inferior. So our main character is an assassin who is trying to take down Fae that are abusing power. So at the beginning of our story, she ends up doing this, and I just love Rave so much. She is such, I've never related to a fantasy romance heroine as much as I just related and loved Rave. So my husband is actually reading this as well, and he said something very similar. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Once you read the book, you'll understand what I'm saying. But he also is really enjoying this. So we're going to have a live show with him and I just discussing this book. We don't have a date yet, but I'll be figuring out all of that before this video posts. So I will have it all down in the description below if you guys want to check out that live show. But overall, I loved this book. It has dragons, it has romance, it has angst. The entire time you're reading this book, you're trying to guess what is going on. So, and the writing, yes, it is verbose, but also it is so unbelievably beautiful. And the ending of this book, there is a twist I just didn't see coming. And overall, I adored this. So I will also say the beginning of this book, I feel is a little bit more wordy than the second half, or I just got used to it. But I feel like the beginning was a little bit intimidating and eventually just kind of flow and you like get used to the writing. Overall, solid 10-star read. I love this. Please, if you are a fantasy romance fan, pick this book up. All right, guys, those are all the books I read in May. Like I said, it was a little bit of an odd reading month, but if you read any of the books I mentioned, please let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you guys have any recs for me, also leave them down in the comments below. I have gotten so many amazing recs from you guys, and it's really been helping my reading slump. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, Leslie, and Kat. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel, and thank you all for just watching this video. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!